Hello. Hello. Thank you very much for joining me on another episode of Graham Sweats Profusely. I was going to speak to our next interviewee in a more general fashion about the work that she's doing at the moment. But she sent me a document today, and I think she's up to something today that it feels so important that we should really just talk about that. So we'll just crack on very quickly. First of all, I'll introduce you. This is Stephanie Davies-Arai. Hi, Stephanie. Thank you very much for joining us. Arai is right, isn't it? That's how to pronounce it. Yes, good. Right. Good. So before we jump into what's been happening today, can you tell us a little bit about what you do and where your interest in gender theories and ideology came from?
Okay, I'm going to try and sum it up really quickly. I work with parents. I train teachers in communication skills. So I've done that for 20 years. I wrote a parenting blog, a weekly blog. And when the whole sort of issue of transgender kids came up in the news, I noticed that there was no challenge to it. And so I realised that parents were seeking information online and finding it from mermaids and gendered intelligence and organisations like that, who were all telling parents, you must affirm it is a girl. And so,
sorry,
can you hear me?
It might be a bit of a bad connection. I missed that last bit. They were telling parents what?
Well, the transgender youth support groups all advise affirmation, which is telling a little boy, yes, you are a girl. And I thought this was very bad advice. And I felt that parents needed another resource that was evidence-based and factual. And I wrote, I think, I published my first article about it in the Wales Arts Review, actually, in 2015. And I got such a response from parents. I thought I have a responsibility because I work with parents, I write for parents. So my angle actually initially was coming to it from a parenting point of view, not from any sort of political view, but I know children. I worked in a primary school for 8 years. I've had 4 of my own, and I've heard all the problems you could possibly imagine from parents. So that's my area. That's where I work in.
There's a kind of a weird noise. I don't know if it's a chair scraping or something, so just to be aware of that. And you set up an organization to kind of make it more official, or to give parents a place they could go to ask about this stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I wanted to create one place where parents could go to access evidence-based resources, one resource really where parents could go. And I called it Transgender Trend because that's the search term that parents were putting into Google. But it does what it says on the tin. I'm upfront about challenging the trend that we've seen, particularly in teenage girls, being referred to the Tavistock. I also wanted to be a voice in the press, because there wasn't a voice in the press. There wasn't anybody challenging it, and I knew that nobody's going to contact me for a comment. So I had to be an organisation with a website.
Right. And can I ask, today we were going to just talk about generalized things, but I think that the stuff you sent me today, you sent me a document today. Can you explain to me, because I'm an idiot, like I'm 5, what the document is and the background to it?
Okay, it's this document. You can see that.
Yep.
It's a document I've been working on for a very long time, because I've noticed that the LGBT inclusive, so-called LGBT inclusive guidance going into schools was factually incorrect, was biologically incorrect, what misrepresents equality law. So I researched all the published guidance I could find, that external providers were putting out to schools. And some of these...
What is an external provider?
Somebody who is external to the school, so an outside agency who comes into a school to teach a certain subject. And we know that groups like Gendered Intelligence have been going into schools to train teachers since 2008 at least.
2008. So this has been so Gendered Intelligence are one of the groups who are pushing gender ideology, which states that if a boy displays feminine traits, then the boy is actually a girl, and vice versa. Is that right?
And some girls have penises.
That's what they're going into schools and telling kids. Right, right. Okay. And so, sorry, continue.
So the new RSE curriculum announced by the government and the statutory guidance was published by the Department for Education. It was suddenly there seemed to be lots of new outside agencies producing resources for relationships and sex education. And I thought this is another way of getting into schools an ideology, because there was quite a lot of nervousness about the new, particularly sex education curriculum. There were a lot of different groups worried about it for different reasons. And so it's one of those areas where schools will, if they don't feel qualified to talk about an area, they would look at, say, any group that calls themselves LGBT and think, well, they know what they're talking about. They're the experts. This must be best practice. We'll get them in. We'll use their materials. So I researched and I found everything I possibly could that was published, and I trawled through it all and took out the quotes that I felt were the most harmful under various areas. So the quotes that were in breach of the Equality Act, the quotes that were biologically incorrect, the quotes, etc.
Yes. Well, let's go into the guide that you've published and look at some of these quotes. You told me to skip straight to section 3 to see some of the stuff that you're talking about, and I read very little before it started to blow my mind. So just to remind you, and can I ask as well, is this official? Is this going into every school, or is it just certain schools? Before we go into this.
No, it's material that schools might decide to use in order to tick the diversity and inclusion box.
Right, and are they are these the same guides that have been successfully challenged and are being taken down by, like the All Sorts guide? I know that was one that was being used. That's being challenged by a lot of that's been successfully taken down by a lot of councils. Is that right? Is that what we're looking at here?
So these are not schools guides. These are not general school guides. They are resources to use specifically for PSHE or the RSE curriculum.
Okay.
They are just resources produced that schools could use in order to teach LGBT issues as part of that curriculum. So they go a lot further than teaching children to be accepting of lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people, which is fair enough, and to gender ideology and teaching children gender identity as fact rather than as a belief.
Yes. I mean, let's jump straight into first one of these quotes that you found. The very first thing it says: importantly for LGBT plus identity, gender, sex, and sexuality are all socially constructed. So they're saying in the first sentence you have here, they're saying that sex is not real, that it's actually a social construct, that we have all, as a society, agreed on. Is that how would you describe this?
Yeah, yes, it's not real, and this is the basis of the teaching, that biological sex is not real, and that the real indication of whether you're a boy or a girl is your inner feelings, your identity. So, for example, some tips for being LGBT inclusive are to use the phrase "a person with a vagina" rather than "a woman's vagina," and "a person with a penis" instead of "a man's penis." This is because, as we will learn, not all women have a vagina and not all men have a penis.
Yeah.
So that comes up regularly throughout this kind of material.
The interesting thing about this as well is that J.K., one of the things that people were throwing at J.K. Rowling when she made her statement, they would often say this, is that no one is saying that sex isn't real. But of course, not only are they saying it, they're trying to get it into schools. They're trying to get this belief into schools that sex isn't real. I mean, what you just said there as well. Here we go again. Sex is often used to talk about the difference between male and female things. Often, but not always, the things we call female produce eggs and get pregnant, while the things we call male produce sperm and don't get pregnant. In humans, people tend to assume that males have penises and testicles and females have vulvas and ovaries, but it doesn't always work like that.
And then we get into the what I find really offensive and dehumanizing language applied to women. So, for example, a question: does the person menstruate? Answer: yes, they are a menstruator. No, they are a non-menstruator. Girls are being coerced into accepting these really offensive words to describe them, and what it's doing is it's taking away the female from being a girl. Being a girl has got no relation at all to being female. So girls are also losing the right to define themselves as the female sex. They're losing the right to understand themselves and their female biology, and that only they can get pregnant, for example, or only women menstruate. So if we're using language, this is really harmful. If we're using language like menstruators and non-menstruators, a girl who doesn't menstruate, there might be serious medical problems there, but she just thinks, oh, I'm one of the non-menstruators. Not to think how sex you are. This is really harmful. I mean, it's not just sort of misleading. It's factually wrong information to teach to children. It's a really critical subject area.
It's destabilizing in a very worrying way. One of the things I always say to people is that I'm standing up for my own sanity in fighting this battle, because the knots that they tie themselves in with gender ideology are so. I think part of the point seems to be how confusing it is, because it enables people like these. Excuse me, but many of the grifters that we're talking about to charge a lot of money explaining it to people.
Let me take an example of that. Listen to this. Unplanned pregnancies can occur if penis in vagina sex happens where the penis ejaculates sperm and the person with the vagina also has a womb.
That's just extraordinary. So I met a teacher, and I was talking to a teacher once about this, and I said to them, "You don't believe that men can become women, do you? You know?" And this teacher said, "Well, I don't know all the science." And it's like, well, you do know all the science. You've just been convinced that you don't by these charlatans, you know.
It's being presented as this, or we really understand more about gender now, and our understanding is developing. It's not. We still have information that we've had forever.
Yeah.
The word woman means female. The word man means male. That's how we use words. That's how we understand who's male and female, by the words boy, girl, man, woman. It's just what those words mean. It's not an identity, and I think the really confusing thing is that they will talk about a range of identities: gender queer, gender fluid, or non-binary, man, woman, as if man woman were equivalent to those subjective feeling categories.
Yeah.
I think it confuses children about sex right from the earliest age. It confuses children about who's the man and who's the woman, and that's a safeguarding risk. It's a massive safeguarding risk, and it takes away children's confidence in using correct language, because some language now may offend people. So that really disempowers children,
Yeah.
right from the very start, because the books are going into early years. It really is right from the very start, and that's really, it sort of pulls the rug of reality out for children who have not yet established the difference between fantasy and reality.
Well, I always the example I always give is the sign that I've posted a few times on Twitter in a cubicle toilet, and the sign, which is supposedly very inclusive and a great thing that every business should have, says, if you see someone who looks like they don't belong in this toilet or whatever, don't challenge them. Don't stare at them. And there was a list of things not to do. And it's basically all the things we tell our kids to do if they do feel uncomfortable, if there is someone in their toilets that shouldn't be. And it seems that all of this stuff, and I'm not sure whether the people behind it know they're doing it or not, but this is what it's doing. All of this stuff is making it harder and harder for children to challenge strange men, basically, because men are always the problem. Men are the ones who there's a few outliers who are women, but basically it's men. Men are the problem, but it's making it harder for kids to challenge men. And it seems to be creating a kind of a groomer's paradise.
Yeah, you've taken us on to the reason why I think you establish the confusion about sex, and that automatically leads to erosion of sexual boundaries. You can no longer distinguish between male and female. So that means then we get onto the facilities, the toilets, the changing rooms, the residential accommodation. And to be inclusive, and those spaces are not inclusive for a very good reason, they're not inclusive. And at this point, I should point out that exclusion is also a valid part of equality law. That sometimes we use inclusion for equality, and sometimes we use exclusion. We need to be very, mindful of which one will create the equality and which one won't. Then it's all mixed toilets, and the advice to children is to not question. Always be respectful of the way people describe themselves. They know more about their gender than you do. If someone tells you their gender, believe them. Don't assume that you know what their body is going to look like. Don't be obsessed with people's bodies in the first place. Perhaps we can all be more interested in people's stories about who they are instead.
Wow.
So that's advice given to children. Now, you imagine that advice given to girls. Now, what we teach girls is trust your intuition. If you feel uncomfortable about a certain man, girls, I think, automatically, and we are socialized into being nice and to thinking about other people's feelings before our own. And girls can get themselves into really risky situations because they don't want to hurt a man's feelings.
Yes.
So they let him into their house, even though, or whatever it is, just, because they feel, oh no, it's not fair that I feel nervous about this guy.
Well,
him.
Yeah, the famous one that was, I think, on an All Sorts poster. You may, but the one that said "embrace discomfort," that told children to embrace discomfort, is one of the most frightening things I've ever seen.
Girls need to be taught the opposite, because if they're being, and you use the word grooming, I do think it is a kind of societal grooming of girls, this material, and that girls are not allowed to have boundaries with the male sex. This is what the material says. And it means that they must accept males in their toilets, in their changing rooms, in even overnight accommodation, and not complain about it. And they don't have the right to complain, which of course undermines consent. But also children. I think it's important to note here that children are not able to give consent. So under the age of 16, we set the safeguarding rules. We adults set those safeguarding rules because children are not able to give consent.
Yes.
And this material is riding roughshod over consent, and it means that males are entering girls' private spaces without their knowledge or their consent. That's wrong.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You don't have to convince me, Stephanie. Now, I'd like to move on a little. Yeah, I want to ask a question about the motives of these people. First of all, because I think that. Let's start here, because I think that a lot of people, like that teacher who said to me, I don't know the science. I think a lot of people are doing this not because they want to erode safeguarding or they want to put girls in danger. I think they're doing it because they think that it's a nice thing to do. It's just nice. It's nice because the word inclusive sounds nice. The word diversity sounds nice. So, but like, do you feel that there are, I mean, the effect of this would be so devastating on our society if it takes hold. Do you think that there are certain interests steering it somewhere along the line? You know, some people who do have designs on children or do want to erode young girls' boundaries for predatory reasons.
There are always people like that, and there are always movements like that in the background. I think whether that in this area, it in a way it doesn't matter. The material itself is bad enough not to have to go to what are the ulterior motives. Of course, this material gives any predator access to girls and women if they choose to. You can see that really clearly from whether that has been organised. I don't know, but I don't think we need to go there. It just does, and we need to recognise that and look at it very closely, because it does take away. It takes away any boundary at all. And the quotes that I use in this material, it takes us on from the mixed sex toilets and changing rooms into advice about sex. So there's a huge emphasis on anal sex, that it's because the boundary between male and female has been muddied, then sexual boundaries are muddied. So anal sex is no longer something that only gay men do. It's like, so the sexual boundaries, the movement into extreme or niche sexual practices comes in. And I think that's part of the Q plus. We need to ask, what does this plus mean? Because the material that's out there goes into BDSM, fetish, porn, prostitution, and all of those areas, and they're presented in this guidance from some of the resources, not all of them, as normal. And that we should not be judging them, and children should not be judging anybody else's sexual practices. And again,
so that goes beyond just people who are gay or lesbian or bisexual, and moves into whether they, for instance, like dressing up as giant babies, or those, people dressing up as dogs and rolling around. And that's the kind of thing that they're saying we should kind of encourage and
it's just normalizing any sexual practice. It just sort of normalizes it and tells children we don't have a right to judge it, and that really disempowers girls in trying to deal with the kind of porn culture that they're growing up in, where they are being coerced. And I include at the beginning of this report a lot of evidence and stats and reports on girls, such as the Plan International report this year. About
is that the one that said? Is that, sorry, Stephanie? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Girls are being coerced into sex acts that are painful, that are humiliating, that are harmful, and that it's because of the normalisation through porn. It's very, very hard for a girl to say no without being called a prude, and now without being called a bigot.
Yes, yes. And wasn't there a report recently that something like 1 in 3 women had said that during otherwise consensual sexual encounters, they had experienced, against their will, non-consensual choking, striking, and spitting. Isn't that right?
And the rough sex defence is being used by men who kill their partners. So
Yeah.
actually, again, we need to, enable both boys and girls to and this is my area of work really, to be critical consumers, to look, when they're shown images or when they're looking at porn on smartphones, to be able to actually critically examine that and and reach their own decisions about it. You have a right to reject certain sexual practices. You have a right to your own boundaries, and to be able to understand the messages that are being sent to you by your culture. Empowers boys and girls, because otherwise the forces, I think, are so strong now, particularly for girls, that it's very hard to. I mean, I know when I was growing up, if you didn't like page 3, you were a prude. So
Yeah.
we tended to be cool with it. And now it's so much worse for girls. And in my guide, of course, I go on to how all of this material is particularly harmful for girls because of the unprecedented rise in girls being referred to the Tavistock. And, it's about 75% girls, and most of those are teenage girls. And this is
Yeah.
historically unprecedented.
Yeah, there was a 5,000% uptick, wasn't there? Or was it 4,000%?
Over a decade.
Yeah, yeah.
And they, there's no understanding about why. But if you're telling a girl who rejects the kind of the kind of woman she sees around her, in through porn, through advertising, and you really, to be a girl now, you've got to be sexually hot, you've got to be groomed to within an inch of your life just to be accepted. The sex stereotypes have become so extreme for this generation. I think it's happening to men as well. I think it's happening to boys as well. And boys are more objectified now. And interestingly, eating disorders have gone up in boys. And I don't want to make a sort of direct link between, you can't do that. But I think the culture has become harder for boys. There are more boys going to the gym and trying to get that 6-pack, but for girls, it's sort of off the scale. They have to be constantly hot. And you never see a girl, well, you very rarely see a girl with short hair now. And when I was growing up, lots of girls had short hair. Kids wore brown jumpers, and, boys and girls. And now it's so rigidly these two boxes. And if you don't like this sort of sexualized, pornified woman that you're supposed to become, and be there for the pleasure of men, then this ideology is teaching you that you might really be a boy, because normal girls love that and embrace it, and they totally identify with that, and they're cisgendered.
Someone pointed out that when it comes to transitioning, it feels like men are transitioning to claim territory, and women are transitioning to escape. To escape the sexualization, the expectations. Do you think that's fair?
I think there's a huge percentage of autistic kids, and a lot of in fact, I think almost 100% of the parents who contact me with their boys, the boys are somewhere on the autism spectrum, ADHD, OCD, all of those. So I think it's slightly complicated with boys, but
Sorry, but I should have said, I guess I kind of find that it up until now, it just seems that transitioning is something that middle-aged men and kind of young men who've watched too much porn seem to be doing. But I guess there might be a new wave of boys who've been soaked in this stuff, who are just, you know, neither of those things, and are just kind of feeling that something is wrong, and they can't quite put their finger on it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the pressure, talking about the pressures on boys now to be, and this is online gaming as well, they all have to be ripped and strong and tough and no feelings and, you know, shooting people. And if you're a gentle, sensitive boy who writes poetry, you don't fit into, you know, I think that there is a lot more pressure on boys, and a boy wanting to escape that kind of macho idea of what he should become when he's a man. It provides a way out, because don't forget the boys have really shot up as well, and we always forget the boys. I mean,
Yeah.
the percentage rise in boys as well has been massive. It's just so over, you know, the percentage rise in girls so overwhelms that stat that we don't take it seriously. But I think there is a sexual element, I think, in some, and that boys are being encouraged into autogynephilic feelings. So I don't know if you've heard of sissy porn, where boys are encouraged to relate to the female porn performer and become her. And so there's certainly that going on in the background. There's an awful lot of that kind of porn being, I think boys are getting sucked into that. But so I think there's a range of reasons, but I do think that for girls, I mean, I hear from teachers that 12-year-old girls tell them that they're absolutely terrified of sex. And that's how they've seen sex. You know, they should be able to, you know, enjoy pain and humiliation. That's what sex is. And so I think for girls, it is a way of escaping, and also for girls, just the development at puberty. It is so it's visible. When you develop breasts and hips, you start being looked at as a sexual object. You start getting unwanted and possibly really scary attention from older men, and you're supposed to be able to handle that, and you can't, and you want to just be a kid again with a kind of androgynous body and have that freedom again. So I think for girls it is an escape, or one of the ways that girls try to escape from this womanhood that they don't want to be part of. Where have you gone? Oops.
Okay. Hey, you're still there.
Yeah.
I'm still broadcasting.
Yes.
That's amazing.
We had
I'm
a bit
so
of
sorry.
silence.
Just hold on one sec. My laptop just ran out of juice. Have you just been sitting there in silence while I ran around the house looking for a plug?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
I talked for a bit, and then I tried to work
okay,
out.
And then you ran out. Yeah, I won't. This is very early days for me and my YouTube star project. So it's not. Things like that are going to happen. Let's move on. Stephanie, I want to talk a little bit about something that I don't think people are aware of the importance of this. But you've spotted in these documents many examples of these groups misrepresenting the Equality Act.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me, why is that important? That first of all, what does the Equality Act say, and why is it important that people are misrepresenting it?
It's important so that we understand our rights. You know, it's that simple, really. Women are protected as a sex. And this is another thing, that girls are being denied the knowledge of their rights and protections in law, with the substitution of the word sex for gender.
Yes, let me just explain, because I think that sometimes, I mean, people are people who are like me and are just catching up. There's 6 protected characteristics, isn't that right, in the Equality Act?
About that, sex,
yeah.
Sexual orientation, disability, pregnancy and maternity, race, gender reassignment.
Yeah, so those are the ones. So basically, what people like Stonewall and all sorts and these types of groups seem to be doing is they're very deliberately conflating 2 of those. They're putting gender. They don't mention gender reassignment, because that's complicated. They don't want to get into that, but they do seem to be mixing gender up with sex. And when you mix gender up with sex, what happens?
Well, yeah, typically they will present the protected characteristic gender reassignment as gender identity. That sexual orientation, so a lesbian is a female who is sexually attracted to the same gender. That's incorrect. It's a female attracted to the same sex.
Yes.
And if you take away sex, then you're taking away sexual orientation. So you're saying that a lesbian is a woman who is sexually attracted to anybody who identifies as a woman, basically, and that could be somebody with a penis. Yes. And lesbians are not attracted to people with penises, but I mean, that's what lesbian means. So that word is very, it's critical in order for, I mean, particularly lesbians. I don't see the same pressure on gay men, but certainly on lesbians. It's horrendous, the bullying that lesbians get for not accepting somebody with a penis as a woman, as a potential sexual partner. So it denies, again, I think lesbians suffer the most, and so they're not allowed to establish their own sexual boundaries and define themselves as same-sex attracted. But that's what the law says, and that's what biology says. But groups like Stonewall, who are supposed to support the L as well as the rest, absolutely no support. In fact, the opposite. That lesbians are under attack from all sides, and there, it really is an attack on same-sex orientation.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, like if we look at sorry about this. I have to find the thing. Where's that gone? Oh, I seem to have lost the StreamYard window. This is going really well, Stephanie. This is about as well as it usually goes for me. Oh no, here we go. Okay, so I'm just going to share a screen just for a second. And show. I mean, people who follow me are aware of this. I always use this as the best example of what's going on. Like, this is Alex Drummond, right? And Alex Drummond is on the Trans Advisory Board group at Stonewall, along with all these other people. Now, Alex apparently goes into Welsh schools, and he tells the confused kids in Welsh schools that he is a lesbian. And I always wonder, if you're a young girl and you realize that you're a lesbian, and you see someone like Alex Drummond claiming your reality like that, what would that do to you? What does that do to your your self-respect and your kind of reality? It must completely destabilize you, and you mustn't know where you are. And I wonder whether that's also a thing that leads to these subcategories. I'm gender this, I'm gender that, I'm two-spirit or whatever, I'm neutral, or these things. because I would imagine a lot of lesbians, you know, if they heard Alex, if they heard one of Alex's presentations, they would have said, well, I'm not that. I'm not a lesbian because I don't have a beard and I'm not wearing a dress. Do you know what I mean?
You couldn't make it up, could you?
I know. It's just
Really,
extraordinary.
it's so beyond, and nothing means anything.
Yes.
Really, you know, nothing means anything. No words have definitions or meaning, and those, as I said, those definitions and meanings are so important for our rights and protections, and particularly for girls, including lesbians. It's really critical. But all of those other categories, I think, what the model does, what the gender identity model does, is it redefines boys as the people who are macho or masculine, and it redefines girls. It redefines the word girl as somebody who's feminine, a person who's feminine. And therefore, if you don't identify with femininity as a woman, then you have to get out of the category of girl altogether and become non-binary, or genderqueer, or you cannot be a girl. So that's what we've done to the word girl. We've made it into some sort of personality type that a lot of girls would reject. And
I saw something the other day. I saw a trans man, a young woman who was being interviewed, and she had short hair, and you know she was wearing slight kind of like a suit type of thing. And they said to her, "So you changed your name from Maria?" And she said, "Yes. I felt I outgrew that name, you know." And I thought, how can you outgrow just a perfectly normal name? Do you know what I mean? And what it's read to me as was that she had such internalized misogyny that she just simply did not want to be associated with any of the things that made her female. You know, it was a very sad little piece, I thought. You know,
I can really relate to these to the young girls now who are identifying as non-binary or as boys. I can absolutely relate to them. I remember, I mean, when I was a child, I was a boy in my own head. I was Mike. Bit of a boring name, really, but you know, I remember the teenage years were so hard, and I really did think to be a real woman, you had to be a kind of brainless bimbo, sexy and hot. And again, I think that's what I learned from my culture. That was I mean, it's going back, you know, 70s TV programs like On the Buses or Benny Hill, and you got they you know, women were presented as brainless bimbos running around without many clothes on, and men were leching over them, and even schoolgirls, and that was family entertainment in the 70s. It was normal.
yes.
The image that I had of what it was to be an adult woman, I think, really, and it takes you years to unpick all of that stuff, but I certainly felt I'm not a woman, I'm not one of them, I'm better than that. So I think it plays into what is actually quite a common feeling among adolescent girls. I'm not like that, therefore I must be like this. And along comes this model that tells them, well, you're not, you know, yes, you are better than that, you're actually a boy. And that sort of, you know, your status is higher than being a girl.
Yes, than being a mere Maria.
So and the awful thing is that, you know, non-binary is what we all are. We're all a mixture of masculine and feminine traits. You know, nobody is 100% only feminine traits or only masculine. We're all non-binary.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's being sold to children as if they're literally neither man nor woman, literally neither male nor female. And you can get medical intervention for being non-binary. So you can get hormones, and I mean, again, all of this is so much more harmful for girls, because typically for girls they'll wear a breast binder, which means they can't breathe and they can't get exercise, and that leads to wanting a double mastectomy. And that's quite common. Now, I knew somebody who worked in a a private plastic surgery clinic, who said, oh, all of these girls coming in, and we've really got to remember to use the pronouns they, them. It's really, really difficult. So all of these non-binary, a friend of mine said recently, a teacher at school had said, oh, we've got one of those non-binary pupils. And I said, what, you mean a girl?
Yes, yeah.
Because you can't be a girl now with pride, because a girl has been redefined as a really regressive pink stereotype.
Yes.
And so the whole model is so damaging, and of course reinforces those stereotypes that we should be challenging, and schools have been challenging and doing some very good work actually on challenging those gender stereotypes. But there's their definitions of being cisgender in this material. Oh, well, let me find you my favourite. There are many more ways, in fact, of being trans than there are of being cis. Cis people may never have to think about their gender expression. That's because they often behave in ways that they are expected to. So people may not say much about it.
Wow.
So cisgender people are this homogenous group of conforming, boring stereotypes.
Yes.
And trans or non-binary or genderqueer, that's become the only way for kids, for this generation, to be, to show the world that they are different, or they don't conform. And in the past, we had goths, we had punks, we had emos, we had androgyny, we had hippies, we had a lot of subcultures for youth to fit themselves into and just, express their non-conformity. And now we're trans, and that's it. That's it. If you're non-conforming, you're trans or non-binary.
Can I ask? So let's talk a little bit about what parents can do to counter some of this stuff. I mean, recently there's been a lot of successes in removing all sorts packs from schools and so on. But if you find that your school is teaching these kinds of materials, what can you do?
Well, first of all, I think if you want to challenge material that a school is using, it helps to have an alternative. So, which is why we produced all of these resources. I mean, this pack just, it is so easy in a school to protect kids who identify as transgender, or kids who have gender dysphoria, along with non-conforming kids, and make sure that every group is protected, pre-gay or potentially going to grow up to be lesbian. All of them need compassionate and care, and it's very easy to do with, you keep your safeguarding. It's not hard.
No. Well, that's the thing. That's the thing I find most interesting about this, is that they are making very simple things needlessly complicated, which helps absolutely no one. So
the old, I mean, the established approach towards children with a cross-sex identity is called watchful waiting, because most kids grow out of it. And it's really, I think if schools challenge gender stereotypes for all pupils, make that a really zero tolerance on bullying for being different, you'd wipe away the need to feel that you were the opposite sex. So those things should be up for critical discussion in schools, and so yeah, I'd say take in, look at our website, get this, download it, get it from the shop, take it into your school and ask them what they're using as part of their RSE resources. Contact Safe Schools, who are getting parents together to challenge this. So you may find, so that's Safe Schools Alliance UK. Yes. And you may find there are other parents in your area that you can work together with, because it always helps to be a group. I think if you're a parent everybody's silenced on this issue, everybody. And parents may feel afraid to even mention the subject to other parents, because you can't risk being sort of seen as a bigot at the school gates.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would say, start talking to other parents carefully, and you'll probably find that that a lot of people are feeling the same as you and feeling that they can't talk about it as you do. So it takes the first person to be brave and just sort of enter that territory.
Yes.
Because parents' numbers are very powerful.
Yeah, I think we've obviously seen the effect of that with the councils dropping these packs elsewhere. So I think, and it is important to. I mean, the brilliant thing about parents is, in the end, as long as they know about this stuff, they will challenge it, because no parent is going to put up with their kid being gaslit and lied to, and their boundaries being blurred, and they're not going to put up with it. So I hope that this video and your resource pack and conversations like this continue to empower parents. I'll put some links to whatever you need me to put in there, Stephanie, at the bottom of this video, and let's return to it at another time when there's more to talk about. But well done for everything you've been doing, and thank you for doing it.
Thank you. I just like to shine a light.
Yeah.
And then, other people can decide whether they think this is good for children or not.
Yes. Well, as we both know, that's the thing they hate most. The thing they hate most is a light being shown on this stuff. So I hope you continue to do it. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'll see you again.
Thanks for having me on, Graham.
Not at all. See you soon. Bye-bye. Bye.